Hello, hello, everyone, to our first March session this year, 2020. I was actually typing this morning, and I typed 3020. I don't know why. So, but it is 2020, and it is March. So we are doing the evolution of the DBA and the age of the cloud. We have Warner Chavez here today with us. I'm really excited about this one. I'm going to be listening to the whole entire thing. A little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to him. This is all of our contact information and how you can get more information about our other sessions and past sessions and things like that. All the organizers and our Twitter handles are up in the right-hand corner. Steve, Shane, Warwick, Kevin, and I all actually help out with the fundamentals group here. So you can look at us online at dbafund.org, and that lists all of our sessions for the year, are all upcoming. It also will show you all the ones we've actually had in the past as well. You can also go to YouTube and also the past learning, the past learning library, and look at all of our videos from the past. Everything is recorded, and so we have like 4 years worth of content. It's awesome. Just check us out. You can get to us, all of us, through the Twitter handle at DBAFun. You can also get to us on Slack. Slack has the entire SQL community. It's awesome, and you're not limited by characters like you would be with Twitter. But we also have our own channel, DBA Fundamentals channel, in the Slack community. So check us out. And then lastly, our LinkedIn group, and we actually have several people, and we put articles up, and it's great. So I love LinkedIn. I make sure that at least look once, as often as I can to kind of get more in the community and that kind of stuff. We wouldn't be here today without our sponsor, so I'm going to go over that a little bit. Our first sponsor is SentryOne, and they have so much information out there for you. They actually help build, test, document, and monitor SQL Server, Azure, and the Microsoft data platform. So check them out online. There's their information. And they actually have articles and things like that online. They also have a resources page, sentry1.com/resources. And rather than list everything here, it's just basically one long web page of a whole bunch of links. So it's wonderful. You can get free query tuning advice online, and you can download a free trial of their software. You can also get their Plan Explorer, which is free. It's a plugin for Management Studio, and it's great. I love looking at that for when I'm looking at the query plans and such. Our second sponsor is DB Watch. And they actually have a complete solution for administration, monitoring, performance tuning, security, and license management. So it's fully everything. And it actually works for SQL Server, Oracle, and other platforms as well. You can look at them online. They also have a lot of blogs and articles on information, and you can download a free trial of their software as well. We are a virtual group from under PAAS. And so I really wanted to just kind of show you all of the different virtual groups they have online. I mean, it ranges from all the different facets of DBA work, as well as some of the softer skills, women in technology, professional development, things like that. So, and of course, multiple languages in here too. So anything you're going to need, something is under some kind of virtual group in PAAS. So check it out. Another thing that PAAS helps out coordination with are SQL Saturdays, and they are free events to go to. These are the ones that are upcoming, and then through, I guess, April. And SQL Saturday is it's awesome. It's free, and it's a great way of networking to see people locally. Speakers actually come in, and anybody who speaks is really just another DBA or CIO or something like that who do normal jobs, and as well as be a speaker for events like this. So check them out, SQLSaturday.com, and I can't say enough about SQL Saturdays. I just love them. So I think that's it. So let me turn all this over to Warner. I'll make you presenter. Exciting.
All right, can you guys see my screen right now?
Yes.
Perfect. So let me go into present. remote. Thank you, Glenda, for the intro, and thank you all of you joining us from wherever you happy to be here to talk a little bit about the evolution of DBAs in the age of cloud. The reason why I came up with this material, which I was telling the guys before we started the broadcast, is I usually don't do a lot of soft skill type of material, but over the last, I would say probably over the last 5 years or so, I've been gotten a lot more questions and interest from people asking about career advice. A lot of people are a little bit fearful about, did I just, walk into a DBA role that's suddenly going to turn into a dead end at some point because of what's happening with the cloud and automation and whatnot. So I decided to put it all together, kind of like organize my thoughts a little bit, and hopefully you guys will get some value out of it. Really, my main goal is to motivate everybody here to grow in the data professional field. All right, so let's get started. So a little bit about myself. I have been working with the Microsoft Data Platform for about 13 years now. The last few years, I've worked quite a bit with also Amazon and Google Cloud Platform. I used to work at HP. I work at a company called Pythian now, based out of Ottawa, Ontario. I am a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and you can reach out to me on any of my contacts that you see there, the Twitter, the email, and also our company has a pretty good technical blog that goes beyond just Microsoft, has open source, big data, data science content, and everything else that Pythian already does, right? So the agenda for today, we're gonna discuss the increasing role of automation, cloud, how people are using it more and more, how aggressive the cloud is, and how it impacts what we do from day to day. The DBA role that we kind of know today, how does it change or not change in the age of cloud? So we're gonna talk a little bit about the state of cloud in 2020. I always like to talk about industry, general topics, get some facts straight, because I find that it does impact how we should behave, how we should position our careers, if we understand what the industry at large is doing, right? If we understand where the value is going to be. We'll talk about the change in the DBA role, how it changes when you're managing cloud environments. And I'm also going to talk about what I think is the key to staying relevant, and why whoever guards the data will always be somewhat valuable to a company, right? So first of all, let's talk about why the DBA role is changing at all. Well, obviously, the cloud is the biggest driver of change for what DBAs are doing, and we'll talk all about that. But let's talk first about the main players you'll see out there, right? So AWS was launched in March 2006. Right now, latest numbers that I've read says that Amazon has between high 40s to 50% of market share. Azure, of course, is the second biggest player. Numbers I've seen usually range between 22 to 25% of the market share. It's going to be actually just past 10 years, I guess, from being launched, February 2010. And then Google Cloud Platform, or GCP, was launched in October 2011. And then there's some other smaller players. I still see every now and then people with some deployments in the Oracle Cloud. Some people are doing something with IBM, but really the biggest bulk of the market is still AWS, Microsoft, and Google, right? This is something that I find very interesting. It's called the theory of diffusion of innovation, and it talks about how technology gets adopted, right? So usually, a technology gets invented and only a very small percent of people will use it at the beginning, right? In 1 or 2 years, you get a few early adopters. In 5 to 6 years, you get the early majority. And in between 10 and 15 years, you get the late majority. And then you get what it refers to as laggards and the tail end of the technology adoption curve. So if we look at the dates that we just saw for AWS, Azure, Google, most of them are crossing the 10-year mark or close to it at this point. So we're looking at, maybe in the best case scenario, we're about halfway through this cycle, right? So that still leaves a lot of businesses that haven't adopted cloud, haven't been impacted by cloud and probably haven't leveraged cloud services in general, right? So something to keep in mind is that the opportunity, the size of the opportunity, I'll refer to this quite a bit in this presentation, the size of the opportunity for getting paid for our skills is still pretty big, right? All right. Next, if we look at the current cloud adoption, like I mentioned, this goes hand in hand with the previous slide. We look at, for example, the location of application workloads, where today, this was taken in 2018 by Morgan Stanley, it was 63% was on premises. At the end of 2018, they were predicting 58% to go on premises. At the end of 2021, so end of next year, only 40% to go on premises. And a move from 20% to 44%, almost half of workloads will go in the cloud. And like I mentioned before, right, we're looking at maybe, according to this theory, we're about halfway through the cycle. So half of the businesses out there that currently have some sort of on-premises system, they probably will be moving to the cloud at some point in the next 5 years. And it might not necessarily mean that they move everything to the cloud. I believe that most companies will still be hybrid in the sense that they have some on-premises, something on the cloud, right? But it does mean that a professional that can position themselves into being familiar not only with the on-premises systems, but only with doing things in the cloud is obviously more valuable as this piece of the pie gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? There's a lot to capture still. So most of the cloud adoption has yet to happen, and it doesn't have a trend that says that it's slowing down. It's just the opposite, right? It continues to accelerate as the years go by. Now, the other thing that I want to highlight here is obviously we're in the PAAS organization. Most of us are somewhat Microsoft friendly professionals in that we have either built our careers around Microsoft products or we work mostly with Microsoft products, and that's the reason why we gravitate to PAAS, right? Because PAAS obviously doesn't have a ton of content in some of the other platforms. It just has a ton of content regarding SQL Server and Microsoft mostly. So I did want to talk about this, about, again, like positioning yourself in the industry and the fact that I think that we are well positioned to capture this change in the market and grow with it, right? So this is the Magic Quadrant for operational database systems from just November 2019. So this Magic Quadrant is only a couple of months old, and we can see Microsoft is actually the top in its ability to execute, and it's just a little bit further behind Oracle in what they consider completeness of vision, right? So Microsoft, Oracle, AWS, the big three players in operational database systems, according to Gartner, and they're, you know, the rest, they're still pretty far behind. I would say probably Google, again, because of its big cloud mindshare that it's acquiring, right? If you were telling me that right now I'm in a user group of IBM DB2 professionals, then maybe my message would be a little bit different, because, you know, we're talking about something that is not really at the forefront of the industry anymore. But I think, again, that our group is really well positioned. If we look at the Magic Quadrant for BI platforms, again, and this one, Microsoft is not just the top of the ability to execute, but it's also the top in completeness of vision. And it is pretty far, pretty far from all the other guys. You guys can see only Tableau is coming in close. The reason for this mostly is because Microsoft has invested so much in Power BI, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about it. Even if you're just hardcore DBAs, you've probably heard about Power BI and the capabilities that it has. So again, another segment of the data market that Microsoft is well positioned in. And then if we look at, for example, the Magic Quadrant for cloud infrastructure as a service, there's only really three players, AWS, Microsoft, and Google. So again, we're in a good spot. So at the end of the day, this all just means opportunity, right? It just means that A, the adoption is still growing, it's not going to slow down, and B, focusing on the Microsoft platform is not a bad career move. It is shown to be a leader in 3 major key areas: cloud IaaS, analytics, and operational database management systems. And for all of you that also follow market news, you probably already know that Microsoft is currently the highest valuable company in the whole stock market, right? So again, opportunity. So now that I've set the stage with that, let's talk about specifics about being a DBA in the cloud. So first, we need to, for those of you, since this is a DBA fundamentals group, I do want to run through pretty quick into the different kind of ways that we run database workloads in the cloud, okay? So the first one is infrastructure as a service, right? So here you don't really manage your actual data center, right? You put something in an Azure region. Microsoft handles the Azure data centers. You don't have anything to do with the physical hardware. They manage all of that. You can scale up or down the VM, right? That is something that the cloud gives you, some flexibility. And you can create them and destroy them if you need to as well. So you can do some testing, beef up a server to run something, and then completely destroy it. And then you only paid for, you know, the minutes that you actually ran the VM. Now, inside the VM though, whatever happens inside the VM is your full responsibility, right? So that's something to keep in mind. In the other model to run database workloads, it's called database as a service, which is basically a subset of what is called platform as a service. Here, you don't have anything to do with the operating system or below, right? You scale up or down, and you can create and destroy on demand as well. But the biggest difference is that some core operational tasks are all provider managed. And this is whether you're using DB as a service in Azure, in AWS, or in Google. The whole point here is to cover all these core operational tasks like backups, patching, etc., so that they don't have to be done by a human anymore. And this is a big shift for a lot of people. Now, in the Microsoft space, patching SQL Server has never been a big deal, for example. Yeah, sometimes a patch can go wrong, but for most of people's effort, really, you just download a patch, you double click it, you go through the thing, comes up, and it's the end of the story, right? I don't know if you guys have any experience with Oracle, but patching Oracle is like doing open heart surgery. You need like big action plans that they post on their Oracle MetaLink website. People get freaked out all the time. There's really specific commands that you need to run to patch different things at the same time. It's definitely not as straightforward. So for us, it's always been kind of straightforward as SQL Server professionals, but it's still something that is taken away from you in terms of your tasks, right? And then you're also going to have clients that run in private clouds, right? And running a private cloud usually maps to running an infrastructure as a service in the cloud, right? So it's a very similar set of skills that you would need to have for that, okay? So what we see as cloud adoption behavior is that most clients have some systems in the cloud, some have some on premises, like I said before. Very few are 100% in the cloud. On premises, virtualization is now widespread. There's, I have probably about 100, 120 clients. Very few of them still run their database workloads purely on physical machines. What we've seen is that initially the clients look at moving their workloads into infrastructure as a service, so basically lift and shift some VMs. And once they're comfortable with that, they look into using some of the platform offerings like Azure SQL Database, for example, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and so on, right? And there are still some blockers for adoption of database as a service, like some things are not exactly the same anymore, but providers are working really hard to make that a non-issue, right? For example, we saw Microsoft move from just having Azure SQL Database to implementing the Azure SQL Managed Instance, to make it really easy for people to take their SQL Server instances from on-premises and move them to the cloud, right? So where do the DBAs fit in these two different models? Well, first, let's talk about database administration when you're dealing with IaaS VMs. So infrastructure as a service, remember, is just virtual machines in the cloud. So the core tasks of being a DBA do not really change on IaaS. What changes is how these tasks are done, right? So capacity planning is done differently because now you don't really need to forecast the needs of building a super beefy physical machine or building a super beefy VM cluster to sustain the growth of your VMs, right? You can be more like just in time in terms of your capacity planning, but it still means you have to do it because you don't want huge surprises, right? Everything has a cost. So if you're running on a certain VM and 1 week later you need to double the cost of your VM to continue to produce the same performance, well, you're probably going to be in trouble when the cloud bill doubles that month, right? So you want to be able to still do some capacity planning. Monitoring is still something that needs to be done. There are some third-party tools that support monitoring. The cloud itself also has their own monitoring. The platforms, the alerts, you have to get familiar with things that are different, but it's still going to happen. HA and DR, if you're doing it with VMs in the cloud, then you still have to set it up and manage it yourself. But there's usually things that are different. For example, in Azure, if you're using availability groups, then the actual setup process is different. You need an internal load balancer and so on, right? And then config optimization, if you need to use a specific type of storage, do you need premium storage, how many IOPS you need provision, and so on. All these things are different on each provider. They all also have different types of storage and whatnot. So it's still something that you need to do, but you just have to do it differently, right? And then performance tuning is the same, right? You still have to do it, but it might be done differently because it depends on what your bottlenecks are. Maybe you need more memory, more CPU, more storage. But it depends on the VM model that you pick. Which one is the best fit for what you're trying to do? Do you pick a memory optimized VM? Do you pick a CPU optimized VM, right? So all these things, you still had to do them when they were on premises. You still have to do them when you run SQL Server in a VM in the cloud, but you just have to do them differently. Without the right config and the tuning, if you just run, SQL on VMs in the cloud blindly without, specific knowledge, you're not gonna get the performance you potentially could get, and you might end up paying more for something that delivers less, right? And now I do wanna emphasize, just by being in this recording, you guys are already way ahead than a lot of the people out there that don't understand these differences. So the DBA needs to understand how the things are done differently when moving to the cloud, right? And on top of that, they need to know how they're done differently on each cloud if you want to have some flexibility and freedom of choice to the business. Now, knowing how to do them differently on each cloud is extremely time consuming, I'm not gonna lie, and pretty hard. My main advice to everybody is, if your company has already selected a particular cloud platform, then just focus on that one in depth and just try to keep tabs on what some of the other competitors are doing on a general high level, all right? And this is something that I want to also stress here. I wrote this down here. As trusted advisor should be on the lookout for efficiency opportunities where, a given database could be inside a VM, you could move it into database as a service and so on. And this is part of the vision, again, of being that DBA role, being that person that has been entrusted with the responsibility of the data, is that you should be a trusted advisor for your business. If your business doesn't come to you with questions related about what should we do with SQL Server in X, Y, Z scenario, or what should we do with our databases in the cloud in all these scenarios, you need to start positioning yourself as the go-to person to get this type of advice, right? It's not so much or being the guy that runs the patches and takes care of the backups. I mean, all that is good, but that, like I mentioned before, automation is going to eat up into all that. Being a trusted advisor is something that is a lot harder to automate, right? If you prove yourself to the business time and time again that you are the go-to person to get not only technical answers, but also, good, thoughtful, strategic answers about what to do with data-related problems, then again, it's something that is not going to be easily replaced by a service, right? Now, let's talk about database administration on database as a service. So what is the big difference, right? Core management is done by the cloud provider. So in my opinion, the core tasks of database administration do change on database as a service, right? The reason for that is that database as a service wants to automate most, if not all, eventually, operational tasks, right? So if we have DBAs that have a skill set that's 100% based on just manual mechanical operations like refreshing a database or patching or making sure that the backups are running, eventually, this skill set will become obsolete. And you have two choices. You either broaden your skill set or you become obsolete, right? Everybody that's here, just by the fact that you joined this webinar, I know that your plan is not to become obsolete, right? So let's talk about that, the difference between these two models and what DBAs should be doing, right? In IaaS, you still have to have the operating system as your responsibility. In DB as a service, you don't even have access to it, so you don't have to worry about it. Patching, you have to do it in IaaS. DB as a service, there's no patching, so again, something else you don't have to worry about. Upgrading can be a big deal in IaaS. In DB as a service, usually there's, at the most, it's like a one-button upgrade type of thing. Backup and recovery is still responsibility in IaaS. In DB as a service, it's already provided. IaaS, you're responsible for setting up and monitoring HA and DR. In DB as a service, HA and DR are pretty trivial to configure. Some of them are already configured. HA, for example, in Azure SQL DB, there's pretty much nothing you should do about it. You only need to acknowledge that you want disaster recovery, then you do a couple of clicks in the map region, and you're off to the races on that as well. So it's not that complicated, right? So the question is, why do we still need database administrators in the platform as a service world or database as a service world, right? And the answer is for tasks that are hard to automate, right? So there's still some tasks for DBAs in database as a service, right? If you are not doing these right now, I suggest that you try to insert yourself into these in your company, regardless of whether you are on database as a service or not, because you just be prepared for that when the time comes. There's code reviews, for example. DBAs all should be doing this before they, blindly throw their developer queries at their database. General performance tuning. Performance tuning is never over. I always tell that to people. Custom monitoring, so not just monitor SQL Server itself, but try to really detect or understand the scenarios inside your database that are specific to your application, right? And this requires understanding the application too, not just being the super user of SQL Server, but also looking at the end-to-end solution. Configuration, optimization, and templates. So coming up with a templatized way to deploy SQL Server, always having it under best practices, having like a golden image, or if it's database as a service, you can still have, best practice configuration in terms of key management, in terms of what features you want to enable, having a really quick way to create a development environment, destroy it, etc. Right? And then obviously security is a big deal nowadays, and it's something that is not automated because the platform can't understand your security requirements. But it's up to you to know what, for example, Azure SQL Database can do in terms of auditing, in terms of encryption, in terms of key management. And when a security requirement comes in, you should be the go-to person that, again, has that trusted advisor role, and they come to you for answers, right? Clients, you'll see that will also integrate on-premises and cloud systems with hybrid architectures, right? So there's also potential there, right, to understanding and growing your career. So if we look into the future and we look past, how these new versions of operational work go, even beyond operational work, I believe everybody needs to also start working on skills for data-centric development. It's also a popular term nowadays is data engineering, right? So we're talking about scripting, automation of all sorts of data-related tasks, definitely the operational ones, but it could be also in terms of data cleansing, data validation, data integrations. Data warehousing and big data is another great field to go into because the cloud has lowered the barrier of entry quite a bit for data warehousing and big data. It used to be that only, really large corporations with tons of capital available could entertain doing warehousing or big data projects. That's not the case anymore. We have clients that run their entire data warehouse for, let's say, $20,000 a year in Azure. That was, unthinkable 10 years ago, where, you had to buy a huge appliance from Oracle or Microsoft or Teradata to run your data warehouse, right? And it would be like, starts at $250,000 just to buy it, never mind supporting it, refreshing it, licensing, etc., right? So I think there's this particularly is a huge market that is opening up for all of us. Hand in hand with that, architecture and delivery of reporting and analytics, especially if you understand the cloud platform that you're working on, is very, very important. Something to keep in mind as well is, right here, we're in the DBA fundamentals chapter, but if you're like me, you will go into the PAAS website and you'll just, I subscribe to everything. And if I see, if I see a cool session in the analytics chapter, I think it's called the BI chapter, I join it. I try to learn about it. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, we have to broaden the skill set. If you just say, I'm just a DBA and you just happy staying there, become obsolete or broaden your skill set. Data integration is still going to be a challenge. It's quite a bit. So learning how to use ETL tools, whether it's SSIS, Data Factory, Power BI data flows, any of these things, very valuable as well. And something that I don't see covered a lot, but also requires quite a bit of attention, is streaming and real-time data flows. How do you do that in the cloud as well? Because we see more and more people really like to have their data, really up to date as much as they can. So I think this is going to be a big requirement as well. As time goes on, most people will want moving closer and closer to real-time data flows too. And something else that's coming up is operationalizing the work of data scientists. I don't think this comes up enough. I've been involved in a few ML related projects, and something that happens quite a bit is that some data scientists will come up with some really cool models or train something really interesting for the application, but then nobody has a way to actually know how do we make it production grade. How do we secure it? How do we make it performant? How do we make it highly available? How do we monitor it, etc., right? And the data scientist that came up with that model, they don't want to know anything about operational, excellence, about, SLAs. Like, that's not their world, right? So if you think, for example, well, I hear a lot about this whole data scientist thing, but I don't think I have the skills for that, or I don't think I want to get into this whole like algorithms and statistics type of world. Well, I would say, don't worry, there's a lot that still needs to be done in terms of, expertise in operationalizing the work of data scientists. And by the way, Microsoft has a lot of material online about this. If you search for Azure ML Ops, they've written quite a bit of blogs about this and the tooling they have for it. It's it's definitely a field that is growing. All right, so we established the new role of the DBA, right? In IaaS, in database as a service, hybrid architectures, I mentioned pretty similar. What I call data-centric development, some people call data engineering, right? So there's a lot here, again, that it's skills that you can broaden, far from just being the on-premises DBA mechanical tasks type of resource. So before I'm just gonna, finish off with like my vision, staying relevant and valuable, I do want to take a step back and kind of reinforce why, again, I think that everybody here is well positioned to be valuable. I don't know if anybody here has ever, sat down and philosophized a little bit about this, but, why are databases specifically so important, right? Like, why do they need a person dedicated to them? Why is it so valuable, right? So databases and obviously the data contained in them is the foundational software or of either operational systems or decision support systems in the case of data warehousing or big data that feeds into dashboarding or reporting, right? So companies nowadays, their revenue is closely or even 100% tied to some of these systems. If you have an e-commerce company that doesn't have actual brick and mortar stores, or doesn't take orders through the phone or anything like that, if your IT systems are down, you are 100% down. Even if you are not, let's say you are a brick and mortar retailer, you know, wherever you are in the world, let's say it's, you know, like a home and hardware type of store where you go buy materials, tools, whatever. If those IT systems are down, if their point of sale machines are down, those people, they might still be able to process some transactions at the cash just based on, you know, cold hard cash. But otherwise, they're still pretty much, you know, taking a big hit. Most people would say they are down for the day, right? Even companies that are not in the IT field, if their systems are not working well, they are pretty much down. And decision-making systems, it used to be that it was like, well, the data warehouse is not really, you know, mission critical production grade as much as the operational systems. That is not the case anymore either, right? If the execs are not getting the reports they want, if the users are not getting the reports they want, you can bet that it will be a, you know, priority one, wake you up at any time of the day type of emergency when and if that happens, right? Like I said, it's the foundational software piece. So if the database itself is not working, anything else that goes on top is not going to work, right? An application server, if one application server is not working, you can restore from a backup. It's easy to swap out. If the database is not working, well, there's can be all sorts of different issues, right? The other thing is they hold a history of company operations, which nowadays, because of security, compliance, and so on, this is getting more and more important to make sure that the database platform that you're on is, you know, is airtight and robust. You don't want to be the one that's going to be on the headlines, you know, in terms of being hacked, data taken out, and so on, right? And obviously, this is something that more and more businesses over time are going to be forced to do, is that whatever data you're collecting has potential to be used for competitive advantage, right? Not just for operational systems, not just for optimizing our own processes, but also to, you know, try to get a leg up, doing things better, doing things faster, understanding our customers better to get a competitive advantage over our other peers in the industry, right? Because you can bet that some of them are already looking at doing it anyway, right? So strong foundation increases the resilience of anything you build on top of it, right? If the database is robust, if the database platform is managed by, like I mentioned, that not just technical leader, but also trusted advisor, then everything else that gets built on top has a good chance of success. Unfortunately, the opposite also applies. I'm sure many of you have joined the job where you did not create the database platform or you were not involved in it, and then suddenly you were thrown into a situation where you had to deal with problems every single day in all sorts of different layers, application, backups, everything, a lot of it just related on, you know, a poorly created, poorly configured database server, right? So as a weak foundation, you start building on top of that, it'll give you all sorts of issues, and hopefully it might not just all come crumbling down without having to rebuild it from scratch. All right, so again, advice here. DBAs, you need to understand the differences, how both IaaS and database as a service are architected, executed, managed, and monitored in each cloud platform. Now, like I mentioned before, I think that is a really hard thing to do. So pick whatever your employers, you know, has chosen as their cloud platform. If they have not chosen one already, well, we're here in a, you know, Microsoft friendly user group. So I would say if your employer has no desire to adopt any cloud, then on your own personal time, study some Azure at the very least. You know, Microsoft is well positioned, it's not going anywhere. I don't think you're gonna go wrong with studying some Azure if your company has no cloud plans at all. And something that is, the real detailed specifics of each cloud provider might be different, but what you will find as you go and study each one of them is that the larger patterns and architectures are very similar. All the cloud providers have some sort of managed database. They all have some sort of managed storage. They all have their own virtual machine layer. They all have their own virtual networking layer. They all have some sort of ETL service and so on. So the major patterns and architectures are still, if you get familiar with what Azure does, you will be familiar with the major patterns and architectures of AWS and Google once you switch out the services names. All right, and again, to implement mission critical systems without understanding your cloud platform can lead to very costly mistakes and incidents. And if by any chance you are the cost of a big mistake or incident, then that's what hits the value of your advice, right? Literally, by trusted advisor is somebody that over time has proven themselves to give, good decisions, to make good decisions for the business, right? So if you're not prepared for having the cloud conversation with your business, or your business looking to expand in some cloud service that you're not familiar with, and you don't proactively go and prepare yourself for it, at the end of the day, you might be forced to, make a decision for them that might not be the best one, and it's just going to reflect back on your reputation, right? So again, this is all trying to motivate people to go out there and proactively start to learn about these things so that you don't get put in a situation like that. And to finish up here, so what is the role as a Cloud Edge DBA? So Cloud has a very aggressive release cycle of new features, the changes. I mean, you guys can see probably the Azure blog. There's something coming out every single week that is new. It is hard to stay up to date on all fronts. So the only way that I see this, that people can really face the way that the industry is changing, is, provide consistent and excellent service to your company and focus on specializing your talents, right? I mentioned a lot of things when I said about data-centric development. I mentioned script and automation, data warehousing and big data. I mentioned architectures for analytics and reporting. I mentioned operationalizing machine learning work. If your company is doing any of these and you have the opportunity to specialize in any of them, then, go with that and try to dig deep into one of them. If your company is not doing any of these, then, just think about yourself, think about what you like, pick one and try to become specialized on it, right? At the end of the day, as technology platforms grow, it's going to be harder and harder for one person to know everything anyway. It's kind of like nowadays, if you talk to somebody and they'll say like, oh, I know everything about SQL Server, you know that already, that they're lying because the product is so big, right? It's going to be exactly the same way here with the cloud, right? So pick one thing and go deep on it, right? Specialize yourself. And keep in mind that the modern DBA, like I said, right, is more than just hands-on keyboard tasks. The hands-on keyboard tasks eventually can all get automated with enough coding, either from the virtualization providers or one of the modern big cloud providers, right? But that guidance, that leadership, that good advice, that the commitment to stay up to date is something that is not easy to automate, right? If you are that person that will provide that guidance, that leadership, that expertise to your company, then you're not going to be automated out of your job, right? So strategic advice, immerse yourself in products that fall under your umbrella. So if you have something that you're already responsible for, but you've just stayed in the surface of it, by all means, just go deeper on it. If you don't, then pick something, and something that just calls to you in terms of your strengths or your passions, and learn more about it. I do advise that you learn about all the main cloud providers. You won't be able to learn all of them in detail, but just pick one to go in detail, and then high level of the other ones, see what they're doing, what their services might be called that are the main ones, especially database related ones, since that's the field that we're in. Definitely build a strong professional network. PAAS is great for that, right? The virtual chapters are good for consuming information. SQL Saturdays are great for building a professional network. Something else that I like to do is just read what goes on in other industry verticals. So if you work in, let's say, insurance, and you see an article about, how to manage data in the healthcare industry, it's good to stay up to date on what other type of industry verticals are doing, because it does give you not only a lot of ideas, but if an opportunity comes along, you're already going to be somewhat familiar with some of the other industries as well. Something else that I like to read about quite a bit is how companies going from startups to like major IT corporations, how they run their ship. Basically, there's lots of companies, startups that blog about their own IT systems, and even Microsoft itself. I like reading the articles that, for example, in the Azure blog, every now and then they have an article about how does Azure do X, Y, or Z, like how do they do their rolling deployments, how do they do their config management, stuff like that. I find it really, really interesting as well. And most importantly, of course, if you want to be, again, that trusted advisor, all these presentations, the actual technical presentations, learn what works, learn what doesn't from other people if you must, and don't be shy to apply it, right? Again, don't be shy to call out if you don't think somebody's doing the right thing, or if you wanna you see a project that's coming in that you might not be totally comfortable with, but you think you can do it if you commit yourself and learn about whatever the technology is, then by all means, again, put yourself out of that comfort zone as well, right? So recap, our role has definitely evolved in all these sorts of different ways, right? IaaS, DBA as a service, hybrid, data-centric, data engineering. But mission critical systems, they all still need a high level of expertise, even in the cloud, to avoid costly mistakes, costly incidents. Remember what I mentioned about most companies' revenues are now completely dependent on their IT systems. Even if you're selling paint, if the operational system in a manufacturing plant is down, you're not producing paint that day. And the cloud has indeed accelerated the rate of change and innovation, and there's nothing we can do to fight it, really. What we need to do is to ride the wave in the same direction, right? And the way that I see that is to try to specialize yourself and become more valuable and take on that role of a trusted advisor. And by the fact that you're already here, you probably already have some sort of database administrator responsibility in your company. It means that you're already well positioned to take advantage of all the different trends that I mentioned on the material today. All right. So our role is still pretty much necessary, and we have to focus on adding value, by immersion, specialization, professional networks, industry exposure, and also going beyond just the tactical technology issues from the day-to-day and moving into that strategic advice type of role, right? And the fact that the cloud is so aggressive actually makes your insight and your experience more valuable than it was before, right? Harder to replace if you go out and really grasp that knowledge, right? And that's it. And I hope, like I said, I hope you guys will take some value out of this, take some ideas, think about which way you might want to grow based on the material from today. I don't know if we have some questions. I do always try to leave time in this session for questions. We still have 10 minutes, so let me know.
The one question I see is what's next level after the cloud? Is it serverless, that type of thing?
Well, database as a service is pretty much serverless, right? So usually people say serverless, and more thinking about the application stack, where you don't even deploy an app server. You just do something like you deploy a bunch of functions to run serverless, triggered by like an HTTP endpoint or something like that. But in the terms of database, serverless is It's really what I would map to something like Azure SQL database, where you just create a database and that's it. Nowadays, even Azure SQL DB has pure serverless, which means that you don't even have to provision the resources for your database, and you just get charged by CPU, right? But that also has its pros and cons, right? Because a serverless database, for example, is not going to be as high performance as a dedicated database with provisioned performance that is just always ready to go, and the caches are warm and the RAM is all filled up. But to that point as well, understanding these differences, like I don't know if you guys have seen the Azure SQL database page, but this thing is single database model, elastic pool model, Azure SQL managed instance. There's this thing called Azure SQL Hyperscale. There's also pooled managed instances. There's also Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which now has been rebranded into Azure Synapse. So just by going into one service, it actually breaks down into 6 or 7 different offerings, right? So again, this is part of the value that is out there to take and to provide to your company, right? I'm sure right now there's not tons of people that understand the subtlety and the difference between all these different ways that you can run a database just in Azure, right? Having that knowledge and being able to advise properly is something that will make you very valuable.
All right, next question, because they're rolling in now. Do you have any recommendations for blogs or websites to learn about cloud technology platforms?
Yeah, what I do for that is, honestly, I have an RSS reader. I think I'm the only person that still uses RSS readers, but I use an RSS reader and I subscribe to the Azure blog and the AWS blog and the Google blog. And like I mentioned before, I mean, it's hard to, I'm not gonna lie and say that I like read everything, it's impossible. What I do is that I focus mostly on Azure because that's really what, pays my bills 90% of the times. And I do keep tabs on AWS and Google. I will do a shameless plug. My friend Chris Presley, who I work for here at Pythian, he has a podcast. It's called the Datascape. So DATA-CENTRIC. You can find it on SoundCloud or iTunes or whatever you found your podcasts. And every month there's a rundown of the updates from Azure, AWS, and Google. Myself and a Google specific consultant and Amazon specific consultant from Pythian, we just run through like the top 5, top 10 updates from each cloud provider. It's all 45-minute to 1-hour podcast. You can just listen to that and you'll probably get a lot of value out of that as well. End of shameless plug.
Which of the areas you mentioned do you see as being the most realistic transitions for mid to late career DBAs in terms of availability and competition with jobs and such?
The one that I've seen people transition the easiest to is to just doing more scripting and automation, just because usually DBAs were used to doing a lot of that in terms of, oh yeah, I created all these jobs that do all these things for me and they fire up these alerts and whatnot. What I've seen mostly is that a lot of DBAs that were really comfortable just doing everything in T-SQL, they started to learn a little bit more PowerShell to be able to do things at scale, like run scripts at scale or deploy jobs at scale or do configuration management like something like PowerShell DSC, things like that. That's what I find the most is the easiest transition or expansion of your skills if you're already in an established position. If you're not looking to rewrite your own version of yourself, that's where I would go. Also, if you are in that position and you're just not familiar with the database as a service offerings in the cloud, that's something easy to learn. That will be something really easy to learn for you, and it like immediately makes you more valuable than the average person that's a DBA out there on the street today, right?
Awesome. What do you think about the new features in SQL Server as big data with HDFs, machine learning with Python and Kubernetes, with hybrid OS? Do we need to learn this text at the DBA? Will we have to change their role as other specialties even within the same tools?
All right, so I'll tell you what I think about that. I believe that you should know what Kubernetes is, or Docker, what it is, and how SQL Server could act differently when it is a containerized SQL Server. I don't think you need to know how to manage or be like the support guy for Kubernetes or for your Docker Swarm cluster type of thing. Like I don't think you need to get to that level. In terms of the ML thing, again, I don't think that you necessarily need to be the guy developing the Python, but you need to be the guy that knows how to properly put it in production. You know, the things that I mentioned before. Does it perform well? Is it secure? Is it highly available? Right? Like you don't have to be the data scientist as well as the DBA. But if the data scientist wants to put something in production, you need to know what the checklist is to do that safely, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. What's your opinion about containers or serverless? That is just taking currently DBA role out of the picture and more converging with app support person as companies are re-architecting their applications from monolithic to microservices.
Yeah, it's a good question. That goes part to what I mentioned about data-centric development or data engineering. If you're looking at, I'm just the DBA and I was just responsible for mostly backups and patching and stuff like that, yeah. I mean, containers, for example, you technically you don't really need to patch the container itself, right? You can just switch out the container for a new one, attach the database files, and then it comes up. At least for like patching, right? You can do it that way. So it does change or take away some more things out from you. But the other things that I mentioned, I mean, performance issues, like those are going to happen whether you're in a container or not. Security requirements, those are going to be the same or just even more complicated as time goes by, and we have to deal with more regulatory compliance, for example. And whether SQL is in a container or not, it doesn't really matter, right? Understanding the features of the product, in terms of being able to talk to the application people and explain why you think something should be, column store, why something should be in memory, and so on. It's still, a very, very valuable skill, right? So even though like the deployment methods are changing, right? Like, either you deployed on premises to Kubernetes, or you're going with serverless in the cloud, or you're going with Azure SQL DB and like a pool in the cloud or whatever. The other things, somebody still needs to do them. Like, is this performing well? Is this secure? Are we meeting the requirements that we are mandated to for our data, SLAs, and so on, right? All those things still need to happen, right?
Next one. I saw demos of SQL Server in containers. Where does it fit, and is it mature enough for actual production usage? To me, containers do not seem mature enough in Windows yet.
So let's start with the last bit of containers are not mature in Windows yet. I would agree with that. I wouldn't run that. The few clients that I do have that are running SQL Server in containers, they are running them on Linux. Is it ready for production or not? My biggest hesitation for most of these things is not about SQL Server itself, is about the rest of the people that you are at the mercy of when you start to run in a containerized SQL Server. So before we had, physical machines and we had our database software on top of it. And you were in charge of the database software, and maybe you had to deal with a sysadmin, or maybe you had to deal with a storage or a network admin, right? Then virtualization became widespread, and now we have to deal with those people, and also a VMware admin that might not be, cooperative or really well versed in the internals of VMware if things go south. And then on top of that, now we have also the possibility of containers. So we also have to deal with, are you deploying on Kubernetes, for example? How good is your Kubernetes admin? If things go south, do you trust that that person will be able to really troubleshoot, help you troubleshoot a SQL Server issue that maybe the root cause lies in the Kubernetes layer, right? If you don't think that's the case, then I would push back against putting SQL Server in production on Kubernetes. If you think that you are in a good position or your company is very well versed in running containerized workloads at this point, then I would be more open to running SQL on Linux in containerized form. Yeah.
What's the difference between Azure SQL database and Azure Postgres database? What's the main point to consider to choose either one to migrate to?
Well, it's the database engine, right? So Azure
Right.
SQL DB is SQL Server, and Postgres is obviously Postgres. And I think right now there's also MySQL and MariaDB. They're all different database engines. If you are already using SQL Server on-prem, then, you know, if you move to Postgres, it's a whole platform migration. It's a big effort. You probably don't want to do it. You would choose Azure SQL DB because at the end of the day, it's the same SQL Server engine under the covers with just some tweaks. If you are deciding to develop from scratch, then you have to sit down and do a different type of analysis. Do you want to go with a corporate supported proprietary software system that has a bunch of really attractive features, or do you go with something open source like PostgreSQL? Maybe it doesn't have as many features, maybe it has some different features that are attractive, but the support model is not going to be the same, right? It's still open source. So some people are not as comfortable with that. I find big corporation type of industries, big finance, big power, utilities, they are not as open to using open source code just because, you know, there's a different level of liability also tied to it, right? So there's a whole, you know, we could debate all day about proprietary software versus open source for all these things. So I think that might be a little bit out of scope. But at the end of the day, the actual difference is, of course, the database engines that are running underneath.
What could be major changes done for databases in the future, say like 20 plus years or so?
Oh my God, in 20 plus years
Right?
or so, the coronavirus will have taken all of us by then. To be serious, I think in 20 plus years or so, everybody here will be likely either developing analytic warehousing, like BI related systems, or they would be just managing actual operational systems, but they would be doing it on a scale way bigger than it is today, right? The density of DBA per database would be a lot higher just because a lot more things will be automated, right? But I mean, other than that, it's hard to predict. IT is so hard to predict. And you know, let's say we're sitting today, it's you know, the year is 2000. It's who could have thought like everything that's gone on in the last few years, right? So I would say for now, let's focus on a 5-year plan. And I'm pretty confident that at least this deck could get you a good next 5 years.
Awesome. Alrighty, that is our time for today. Thank you everybody for participating and showing up. Thank you so much, Warner. I really enjoy your presentation. So I was looking forward to saying hi to you again.
Absolutely. Thank you everybody for joining. I appreciate all the questions. I'm glad that we had questions and time at the end. And again, if you think about anything else, feel free to reach out to any of my contacts that you see in the bio slide. And yeah, I always try to get back to everybody.
This will be available on the PAAS site under the Learning Library within a few days. I will get it uploaded so we can go ahead, you can see it there. Otherwise, check out dbafund.org for our future sessions, also via email. So make sure you subscribe to that because I send it out not every Monday, but every Monday before the presentation, or Tuesday morning like this morning if I'm really rushed like I was yesterday. So otherwise, have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.